Thank you, Rose. So today I'm going to be talking about what we've learned from some of our quantitative findings from our study. So let's jump right in. Okay, so for the quantitative portion of the study, young adults in the US aged 14 to 24 were recruited by us fellows, the Visible Network Labs team, and youth organizations in our networks. The survey, as we've said before, was an adaptation of Visible Network Labs PartnerMe tool, and that was administered between November and December 2021. Participants were compensated with a $10 gift card upon completion of the survey. And the data from the interviews that we conducted during the qualitative portion of the study was used to adapt the PartnerMe screener for use with young adults. And questions regarding school, identity, mental health, future planning, and comfort asking for help were added to the survey in light of the qualitative findings. And we also added open-ended connections about social connectedness to the adapted survey. In the quantitative portion of the study, we had 43 participants from Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and a few who did not list a location. 63% of the participants were women, 20% were men, and the remaining 17% identified as non-binary, genderqueer, questioning, or did not respond to the question about their gender. Participants' ages were mostly evenly distributed across that range of 14 to 24, with the largest group being 19 to 21 and the smallest group being 22 to 24. In terms of race, 40% of participants were Black, 27.5% were white, 17.5% identified as mixed race or listed more than one race, 10% were Asian, and 5% identified as a race other than what was listed. And I really love this word cloud that we have here on the right. This is the responses that we received when participants were asked to share their racial, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds in their own words. And we received this really impressive, vast array of responses, and they tended to fall into a few different categories. They used their race, such as Caucasian, Asian, or Black, nationalities, such as Jamaican, Korean, and Russian, religions, such as Jewish, Catholic, and Muslim, and other identifiers, such as first generation. And this shows a lot about how young people identify themselves and what parts of their identity that they consider important. And continuing on with demographics, about 75% of the participants were enrolled in school, mainly college. And the bar graph to the top left shows the school levels of the participants. In terms of household structure, there was about an equal number of participants who lived with two parents, who lived with one parent, and who lived in a household without their parents. And 9% of participants split their time between their parents' homes. And finally, approximately 20% of participants were caring for their siblings or other young adults in their household or even their own children. When we asked youth to define what social support meant to them, a few themes emerged. They tended to define social support as their family, friends, and other members of their support network who show encouragement and care about them, listen to them and show understanding of what they have to say, help them with their physical and mental health, and provide them with advice and guidance in their lives. We also asked youth what factors make them more or less likely to accept help and resources. Youth were more likely to accept help and resources when the person or people involved had experienced similar struggles. Those offering the resources were non-judgmental. The focus was on the young adult rather than other motives. They were assured of the confidentiality of the resource. The resource was convenient, meaning that it was reachable by walking or public transportation. The resource was free of charge for them to access, and the resource was recommended by trusted sources, such as people in their network, their friends, their family, teachers, coaches, or other people that they know. In contrast, youth were less likely to accept help when they perceived that asking for help would lead them to be seen as weak, asking for help would bother or burden the person from whom they were seeking help. There were too many hoops to jump through before they could access the resource, or they felt that their confidentiality could be violated, especially without their knowledge or consent, such as by a mandatory reporter. And they were especially concerned with confidentiality that police or other authorities might get involved as a result of their accessing a resource. And I've personally seen this concern in my life about confidentiality with LGBTQ+ youth, who are often afraid that they might be outed when they seek support, or young people who are avoiding accessing mental health care due to fears and misconceptions regarding involuntary hospitalization. And that can be especially exacerbated, like if they think it's necessary or crisis situations, they still won't access the help because they're worried about that confidentiality. The areas in which young adults reported needing the most help were future planning, access to resources, transportation, getting to and from school, and sex education. There were gender and racial differences in which the needs were identified. Twice as many women as men identified future planning as a need. 75% of Black youth identified future planning as a need compared to 27% of white youth. And 72% of white youth identified transportation as a need compared to 28% of mixed race youth and 25% of Black youth. Another area in which youth responses differed was age. These graphs show how many youths in each age group tended to need help in the areas covered by the survey. We saw youth of all ages tend to need help in mental health and social areas, including talking about their feelings and anxiety. You can see those areas highlighted in orange. And that suggests that these needs are coming from something that isn't related to their age, such as the COVID-19 pandemic or the increase in digital socialization among young people. However, when they were different among age groups, for example, younger youth, which are highlighted here in blue, they tended to need more help with things like depression, talking to others, and making friends compared to their older counterparts. For those age groups, it might be helpful to offer those resources via school or virtually, since they're less likely to have access to transportation that can help them reach another location. They also needed more help in school-related areas, which are highlighted in green. College youth especially reported needing help in these areas, indicating that they may need more targeted resources for that demographic. These resources could be made available on college campuses for maximum convenience, and college resources in particular could be promoted through faculty, staff, and peer ambassadors, basically other young college people who are in that position. They could help promote those resources to increase their trust. And finally, older youth tended to need help in areas like paying bills, which indicates that support is needed even after leaving secondary educational or post-secondary educational settings. And because older youth are more likely to be able to access transportation compared to their younger counterparts, those resources could be provided in a central location such as a library or community center to maximize the resources that they're exposed to. Overall, more white youth tended to be receiving help in the areas listed compared to youth of color. These discrepancies were highest in anxiety and depression, suggesting that mental health support may be less accessible to youth of color compared to their white counterparts, or that the more clinical sounding terminology here, using anxiety and depression instead of feeling nervous or feeling sad, might be affecting how the youth were answering this question. Areas where youth of color and white youth reported receiving similar help included areas like dating and relationship conflict and worried about paying bills. And only youth of color reported receiving help in the following areas: balancing school and personal life, managing societal expectations, managing job responsibilities, getting a job, sexuality, feeling safe at school, trouble understanding others, and trouble having others understand me. And one really important thing to note is that 35% of youth of color responded needing help with none of these, while no white youth responded none of these. And this could indicate that the areas listed might have been unclear, like I mentioned before with the anxiety and depression, or that there were areas in which youth of color do need help that were missing from the survey. And finally, we have these network maps here. These show connections between areas in which youth of color are getting help on the left and areas in which youth of color need help on the right. The circles represent different areas in which they need help, and their size correlates with the number of youth who reported getting help or needing help. The lines between them mean that youth reported both areas. Where the lines are thicker, more youth reported both of those areas. Many of the issues with which youth of color reported getting help also appeared among the issues in which they need help. You can see that they have boxes to highlight them. This suggests that they need more or different help in these areas, or that the help for these areas is not reaching all of the youth of color who need it. The interconnectedness of these areas suggests that appropriate help in a central area highlighted in yellow, such as schoolwork and grades or talking about my feelings, would also help youth improve in the connected areas.
Okay, awesome. Zoe, thank you so much. That was a great start. We're gonna transition to Kyra in just a second, but just before we do that, I'm going to ask each of you at the end of your presentations, in just a sentence or two, is there what, surprised you about these findings or left you with more questions?
I was really surprised by that statistic that nearly 20% of the participants were responsible for caring for someone younger than them, be that their siblings, their own children, or other young people in their household. And we didn't include any questions about access to childcare or support in looking after younger people. So I think it might be really interesting to look at that further.